Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-America podcast. My name is Bill Trocchi, senior editor at sportingnews.com, joined as always by our lead college football writer, Bill Bender at sportingnews.com. And Bill, we got another special guest this week as we go through the offseason, touching base with a few programs around the country. We had Nebraska a couple weeks ago. This week, Mike Griffith from the AJC Dawg Nation, a multimedia reporter who has covered the Bulldogs for the last 5 years, is here to join us and talk about Georgia, the Kings of the Hill at this point. And Mike, I was looking at the record over 5 years. Georgia 60-8 with you on the beat. How much credit are you taking for that?
About the same as I took for Auburn's 11-0 season in '93 and the Tennessee undefeated team in 1998, 13-0. And maybe the Michigan State Rose Bowl team of 2013. So I've been around a few of these guys. I've seen some pretty special groups over the years.
That's very good. Very good. So, I mean, look, we're going to catch up on Georgia, obviously, the program that everybody's been talking about. They left No Doubt this year, who was number one with that dismantling of Tennessee. But now the next season is about to take shape. We got a three-man quarterback derby between Carson Beck, Brock Vandagriff, and Gunnar Stockton. How do you see this race shaping up, and does the loser leave town after spring practice?
Wow, well, first of all, I don't think there's going to be a winner or a loser after spring practice. I think that they're going to continue this quarterback competition, maybe even into the season. When you look at a very forgiving schedule, Georgia was originally supposed to play at Oklahoma in week 2, and the SEC encouraged them to move that game because of the complications with Fox and the ESPN and the teams joining. So that's Ball State now in week 2. And it's pretty forgiving. The three quarterbacks, as you mentioned, Carson Beck is probably the conventional choice. He's been in the program 3 years. He was probably the loser in Todd Monken leaving because he's well-versed in what they do right now. And now you've got Mike Bobo coming in, and we still think Carson is the most experienced and probably has the best arm, more of, like I said, a prototypical NFL quarterback style, I would say, with Carson. But Vandagriff and Stockton bring that mobility to the table that Kirby Smart really likes and can really get you out of trouble. And with Bobo, again, it's kind of leveled the playing field. Gunnar Stockton was actually committed to Mike Bobo when he was the offensive coordinator at South Carolina a couple years ago. So you wonder, does that give him a leg up? And then there's Brock Vandagriff, the former 5-star committed to Oklahoma at one time. And Vandagriff's been in the system a couple of years. He's already said he wants to graduate from Georgia after the fall semester. He'd be graduating in 2.5 years, just to give you some idea of what type of student athlete he is. So these are all three very capable quarterbacks. They all have their strengths. And it'll be interesting to see what offensive personnel dictates you do with the quarterback position. Part of the reason that Stetson Bennett became the quarterback over a 7-0 JT Daniels was there were so many injured receivers. Kirby Smart said it's hard to go 4 and 5 wide when you've only got 6 or 7 healthy guys. So let's see what the receiving core looks like. Let's see how much double tight end, RPO versus spread system and downfield action that Mike Bobo decides this offense can do.
Well, I was going to ask Mike, and good talking to you as always. I was going to make it clear that Mike, when I was coming up as a college football writer for Sporting News, he was the first one to kind of come up to me, be very nice, help me with some story ideas on those Michigan State teams, by the way, which we got to see together. And so what's a separator? I mean, how much is accuracy a separator with these three guys? Obviously, we haven't seen Brock throw, I think, 3 passes, and we haven't seen Gunnar yet, but out of Carson Beck's limited sample size, how much is that accuracy? It seems like, Stetson last year, he didn't throw picks. I mean, how much is that a separator in this race with these three? And can Carson Beck be that guy to kind of take hold of the job?
Well, once again, depending on the type of offense they run, and I'm inclined to believe they're going to continue to play the pro style. And for those that, the deeper dive into that, when you're a pro style quarterback, you're essentially flying the jet at the line of scrimmage. You're at the control, all the levers. You're controlling the protections. You're controlling the route adjustment. A lot of times they'll call 2 or 3 plays in the huddle. You determine which play is best based on the defense. You're doing this in a very small time frame. So as important as it is to throw the ball accurately, it's important to make the right read and the right protections right, to keep that ball out of trouble. You don't want to be thrown into the double coverage or into, some zone. A lot of teams will play garbage defenses because they know, when I say junk defenses, they disguise, maybe zone on one side, man on the other. And you've got to know how to read that. So that's probably first and foremost, is for Georgia to determine how much pro style and exactly how much do they want their quarterback to do at the line of scrimmage. So that's the first thing. All these guys can throw it in the bucket. They're all pretty accurate. Stetson, it wasn't exactly the most accurate guy, quite frankly. He was bailed out a lot by Brock Bowers, and who I still think was created in some laboratory in Northern California with this catch radius and his ability to break tackles. And you see him out of uniform, and he looks like he should be, nothing against UPS workers, but he looks like he should be delivering packages. You don't see a guy that's just bulging out of muscles. You see a guy like who's this guy? Oh, that's Brock Bowers. No, it's not. No, it really is. But the guy has this incredible catch radius. Looks like some throwback from the 19th. Needs the high black leather cleats, I think, to complete the look. But this guy's amazing, and he's really the most important piece in the arsenal, Bill. And the way that Monken used him, whoever's at quarterback, this guy's Frankenstein. He can line up in the backfield. He can line up as a tight end and block. You can split him out wide. He's an impossible matchup, seemingly. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets used. And as to your point, which quarterback throws to Brock Bowers, and who can Georgia use to offset Bowers? Last year, they had an incredibly gifted tailback in Kenny McIntosh, who's the most versatile tailback in Georgia history. I mean, the guy's one of only 3 players in the SEC since 2000 to have over 800 yards rushing, 500 yards receiving, and 10 touchdowns in one season. The other 2 were Dexter McCluster and a guy by the name of Percy Harvin. Well, you're not going to have that receiving threat out of the backfield anymore, because that was answer number 2. Everybody tried to take away Brock Bowers, right? And when he wasn't there, if Ladd McConkey wasn't beating somebody deep, it was an easy dump off to Kenny McIntosh. Well, or Darnell Washington. Another one of these, creations out of a lab. You just don't find 6'7", 285-pound guys that block like an all-pro offensive tackle, but also, have hands, is soft as a baby's bottom. I mean, and Darnell Washington was that. He's gone. So there's so much more to this offense that needs to be solved than just the quarterback. And sometimes you work backwards, as I was saying. They got to see, well, do we have enough receivers, where you want to go 3-4 wide and put that prototypical NFL arm back there? Or do you not maybe have as many weapons? So you need that 12th offensive player, the running quarterback. So there's a lot that's still to be decided, Bill.
Mike, I had the same reaction when I saw Brock Bowers at Media Day at the Peach Bowl. And I was like, and he's just in that little sweatshirt sitting behind the table. You're right. He looked like an ordinary college student. I'm like, this is Brock Bowers. But
yeah.
You mentioned the receivers as a key piece of this offense. Ra Thomas, right? Arrested in late January after an altercation in an on-campus dorm between him and his girlfriend. Thomas arrived at Georgia at the beginning of the semester after transferring from Mississippi State, where he was the other Bulldogs' leading receiver. He's expected to have a large role with Georgia this fall. What are you hearing about his status as spring ball approaches?
Well, you're right, Bill, and it's unfortunate. I don't know all of the details of what happened with Ra. I've read the same, police report or incident report as anyone else, and a 17-year-old girl from Mississippi's there to see him on a weekend. And as the story goes, he's upset over somebody she followed on Instagram, and she wants to go work out in the dorm room gym, and he stands in front of her. I don't know the extent of what happened. Domestic issues are always very difficult to sort out. Often turns into the he said, she said. And then as far as how it runs its course through the legal process, I think there's some optimism. Ra is still at the University of Georgia. I think there's some optimism that he'll be with the program, but that has not been completely cleared yet. And certainly there's a litigation and legal process that has to play out. So I don't want to speak out of turn, but to your point, he's considered a very valuable ad. They need an X receiver, the feature receiver over there on that, typically the right side, power right. And it was A.D. Mitchell last year, and A.D. has transferred to Texas. He's got some family members there, and Steve Sarkisian, certainly the all-gas, no-breaks genius, except when he plays TCU, and he only scores 1 touchdown, and Georgia had 65 points. But that's a whole nother story. But we don't really know for sure, but I think Ra will be that X. And then, of course, a very valuable transfer out of Missouri. Love it. And this kid is going to be in the slot now. Didn't see a whole lot of slot action last year. Georgia was in the double tight end formation, I believe, 65, 67, 2/3 of the time. But Dominic Lovett, another guy that was the leading receiver in his program, played really well against Georgia, by the way. I think he'll be a dynamic playmaker out of the slot. And Georgia's been solid there, but I don't think they've had anybody really dynamic, probably since McCole Hardman. And, of course, you're familiar with him and his speed and exploits, occasional exploits with the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think you're going to have a dynamic slot if Ra pans out. And then, of course, I think Ladd McConkey is tremendously underrated. Got great feet, great hands, runs great routes. He's the model student athlete. You just want to vote for Ladd McConkey for something. He just stands in, and I don't know if you've been exposed to him, but he's that type of guy. A lot of comparisons to Hunter Renfrow, beyond the fact, but I really like McConkey out there, over there at the Z. I think Rara. Now, when you're adding these new players, this is important because it's going to take them time to learn the offense. They're not veterans coming back. They're not going to be as well versed. A lot of the magic that you saw last year at Georgia, it's not that Todd Monken, was able to pick the right play every time. As I said earlier in the interview, he didn't have to. He could pick 2 or 3 and then let the quarterback determine at the line of scrimmage. Now, when you're calling those audibles and those adjustments, everybody's got to be on the same page. Otherwise, you get those throws. You go, wait a minute, he threw it over there, and the receiver went over there. They didn't communicate effectively, or they didn't make the same read on what we call the option route, where the receiver runs a type of route depending on whether he's getting outside in coverage or inside out. Corners, DBs, they have to play a guy one way or the other. And depending on the way they play him, the receiver breaks and the quarterback anticipates, right? So they've got to get that chemistry. And that's why that soft schedule is so important to Georgia, because much like that Rose Bowl team, Bill, who really didn't sort their quarterback mess out until D'Antonio lost on some phantom pass interference penalties at Notre Dame, the 4th game of the season. They're going to be able to work these things out, get that timing down. If they had an early test, and I don't know how much of a test Oklahoma is anymore, by the way, but if they were playing a Clemson in the opener, or maybe an Oregon in the opener that they weren't familiar with, that would be different. But the fact that they've got these easy games early on is really important. Scheduling is so important in championship races now, because it's going to give whoever the quarterback is, because remember, we're not going to see this decided in the spring, but it's going to give that quarterback time to get on the same page, find that chemistry and that comfort with these new receivers in the program.
Mike, were you surprised? Okay, so we had an offseason where Alabama goes with Tommy Rees, Ohio State, Clemson, Michigan will have 1 coordinator instead of 2. So that short list of national championship contenders, everybody's going to have a new OC. Georgia goes with Mike Bobo, doesn't extend the search out. I mean, I guess my first question was, 1, was that a surprise? And 2, Todd Monken helps develop Stetson Bennett into a guy that's going to get a shot at the next level. Is Bobo just a safe hire, or do you see kind of the same progression with the quarterbacks, the skill position guys?
Yeah, and Bill, you do an incredible job of capturing the essence of the vibe of college football, because what you just said is exactly what everybody's asking, right? And of course, now this is my job. It's why Trotsky's got me on here, to give you the expertise of exactly why this wasn't just a good hire, it was the only hire. Okay, number 1, I think Kirby recognized, and all you got to do is look at Todd Monken's resume, by the way. This guy doesn't stay anywhere very long, okay? He's only been 3-4 years, and this is typical of offensive coordinators. They go places, they do well, and they either get promoted or they get fired. And Monken even told us that. He said, all these people talking about family. Well, let me tell you, if I don't do a good job, you're firing my ass. I don't want to hear. And he's right. He's right. There's no family. Everybody's family till you lose, and then you're out of there. But Monken gets it. He's got to perform. The relationship is he does a good job or he gets fired. So he gets it, okay? Now, Bobo's a little bit more family. This is a little bit more family. This could be a destination location because Mike Bobo's, number one, his son is on the team. A lot of people probably don't know that. Not a high-profile lineman. Good enough to get a scholarship, but hey, you know. And two, he played quarterback at Georgia. And three, this is his second go-round. You know, here's a great stat. I think we all respect Mark Richt. Anybody that's had any dealings with Mark Richt, not only because what he did on the field was good enough to make him a first ballot Hall of Famer, but he's a true gentleman of the game. Do you realize that all of the offensive assistant coaches on the Georgia staff, with the exception of Del McGee, coached under Mark Richt, including Kirby Smart as a running backs coach? This staff looks a lot like Mark's staffs, and Mark's offensive staffs were fine. When you'd watch Jordan, you would go, oh, boy, that Mark Richt's got a lousy offense. You'd say, what in the heck are they doing on the defense? So you're pairing a very good offensive staff with Kirby, who I would argue is now clearly the best defensive staff and the best defensive coach in the country. So that's number one. Now, number two, Bobo didn't have championship trophies. Mark Richt, he couldn't quite get over that hump, right? But if I said to you, Bill, who coached the richest number one overall draft pick quarterback in history? You'd say, Mike, that's easy. That would be Matt Stafford. So that's Mike Bobo. Yeah, ding, ding. Okay. Who coached the SEC's all-time leading passer? You say, give me a tough one. That's Aaron Murray. That's Mike Bobo too. And then I say, okay, well, but who coached the SEC's all-time winningest quarterback? You might have to think of the name, but you already know it's Mike Bobo.
I got the name.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So that's kind of the grand slam of SEC quarterbacks that Mike Bobo. And here's one more. Who was the offensive coordinator for the highest scoring team per game in Georgia history? Mike Bobo, 2014, even though Todd Gurley missed 6 games, even though Malcolm Mitchell. So this is an accomplished coach that we're talking about here. Now, he doesn't have the big trophy, and the fans like to trash him on Twitter. But if you look deep at the resume of the coaches of the quarterbacks that he's coached, of the success that he's had, and the fact, and this is the incredible fact, he's already been on staff for a year. He already knows the terminology. He already knows the players. He already knows the vibe. And I just can't imagine, like, how would you not hire Mike Bobo?
And, you make a good point that, the schedule being as it is, right? They're going to have an opportunity to kind of get their feet wet and learn whatever they want to learn under Bobo. And also, Bobo's been a head coach. He did it for 5 years, I think. And then he's been at other SEC programs, the staffs didn't work out. And so I think when you're looking for stability, I think Bobo could be here for a while if he has some success, I guess is my point, because he's done the head coaching thing. He's done the assistant thing around, and he sees when things go south, and there's no indication Georgia's going to be going south anytime soon. So yeah, I think this is a pretty good match.
Well, hey, we've seen this before. Will Muschamp came back and ended up being the defensive coordinator when Dan Lanning moved to Oregon. It's pretty incredible. The fact that you've got, they call them the Three Musketeers. Ray Goff recruited these coaches. All these guys were recruited by Ray Goff at Georgia. They were all buddies back then. They're all the kids of former high school coaches. And could this be the next college football dynasty? I think Bill makes a good point. Now Alabama's Alabama, and my goodness, I've been one of those that have tried to bury Nick Saban 2 or 3 times before. And he's like a zombie, keeps coming back from the dead and winning. I don't know if Bama, they certainly have the talent to do that. But to your point, I think Bender made a great point. A new hire there with Tommy Rees, and I think a good hire, by the way. But so much newness: new defensive coordinator, new offensive coordinator. Kirby took a lot of what Nick did at Alabama and brought it to Georgia in 2016. I mean, you'd be crazy not to, right? But now we're in a different era where there's so much more than just how do you practice and how do you schedule. Now you're looking at how do you retain players? How do you work NIL deals? How do you recruit in this climate? Because this is a different world right now. And that's where Kirby Smart now has the patent.
Well,
Kirby is the one who has mastered the current college football game. The game's always changing. We've seen it in journalism, guys. You know, the guys that were dominating with the typewriters in the 70s and the 80s, we don't see them anymore. And when a lot of them had to hold up their phone and start doing videos, they checked out. If you want to stay in the game, you got to change with the game. And that's what Kirby Smart at 47 years old can do, maybe a little better than Saban at what, 70, 71 this Halloween? I think Trotsky brought up a good point. Kirby Smart in Georgia right now, the team a lot of people talking about with good reason.
Well, and what was the first word out of Kirby's mouth after the game, the 65-7 beatdown we were at out in California? One of the first things he talked about, Mike, was entitlement. And that's my question for you is when you look, we as sports writers have the notion, and I do it all the time, we're allowed to, the coaches talk about not looking ahead. I'm allowed to. I mean, I'm a writer. I'm not playing. So if you look ahead at this schedule, you see 10-0 before they go to Knoxville. It's hard not to see 10-0. And I know that Kirby would hate hearing that. So how do they guard against entitlement? And how do they guard against, I think the last time somebody sprung an upset on them was Muschamp in South Carolina, right? Like a real one, a real upset. And how is Alabama still a motivating factor after everything that was made with Pollock's comments? I mean, all of these spin to me that I think they'll be 10-0 when they go to Knoxville. How do they guard against that and go for a three-peat, which has never been done in any of our lifetimes?
Yeah, great questions. And there's a lot of factors to this. I guess I would start with this. At a program like Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State or probably Michigan for that matter, these kids have to wake up worried about keeping their jobs, number one. There's no time to look ahead. If you don't have a good practice today, Joey on the second team is waiting to take your job. And the third team guy was just recruited and brought in to beat you out too. So number one, the self-preservation factor. When you're in a program like this, the word elite gets thrown around a lot. But it's true. I mean, you don't go into the Georgia football building and see, some fat kid in the corner and go, hey, there's a project guy they think is going to be good in 2 or 3 years. They all look like they're ready to go to the Olympics tomorrow. So number one, the competition within the team keeps everybody on edge, especially with a guy like Kirby. He's not going to announce the starting. The year that Jake Fromm and Justin Fields competed, he never did announce a starter. The only way we found out, because in Jake Fromm, poor Jake, got sick of answering the question. Jake, who's the starter? Yeah, I don't know. Coach hasn't told us yet. Game week, he finally found an opportunity. When we asked him about DeAndre Swift and the kind of season that we thought DeAndre would have, Jake said, I can't wait to hand off to him on the first play of the season. That's how Jake sneakily told us that he was this. But the point is, the starter was never announced. And knowing how Kirby plays ball, I wouldn't be surprised if there's not a depth chart and the starter is never announced. Guys, they're competing every week, he's going to tell us. And because that's what they do everywhere else, right? Now, it didn't happen last year with Stetson. Why? And why did Stetson go on Good Morning America the day after the national championship game in 2021, after the 2021 season, and say he wasn't sure if he'd be back? Because he found out that Georgia was trying to sign Caleb Williams out of the portal. So when you don't even have your job secure as a championship game MVP, as Stetson Bennett was after Alabama, that gives you an idea of what this program is all about. Kirby is going out to sign the best. No apologies. That's his job, and it's your job to be the best. And I better be on time for the next press conference, or he might try to find my company, hire somebody who's filling my seat, because that's the mentality and that's the feeling around there. When you go in that football building, there's nothing comfortable about it. It's championship driven, and that's yes or no. Does this help Georgia win a championship? Yes or no. That will determine the course of direction. So number one, the competition within the program. Number two, this has been a challenging off season. You all know there was a horrible tragedy last month, the night early morning after the national championship celebration, where a student athlete and one of the recruiting staff members was killed in a horrible accident. Incidents like that draw a lot of attention and scrutiny to a program. Coaches already circle the wagons, even more so now. That was a wake-up call. You know, there's no entitlement or complacency when you lose a teammate to tragedy. It casts a pall. And how people react to that adversity is different from place to place, but it's been very humbling for Georgia. It's been a very quiet offseason other than that. Now, there's a lot of work to be done, and one of the things that Kirby Smart does, and this is a great example, Bill, this is the kind of story you'd write, and who knows, you maybe even wrote it last spring. But Cedric Van Pran, who's coming back for a third year, this was last year. They came back for spring drills, and there was, and I think Kirby totally planted this, but there was a national championship game logo on the practice field. And Cedric Van Pran, excuse my French, said they were pissed off. They said, get that off the field. That was last year. There won't be any championship emblems. And it was a very ugly one from Los Angeles here, by the way. There won't be any championship emblems around the Georgia football building, except when the recruits come in. Now, when the recruits come in, it's a championship program. But when they leave, it's you guys haven't done anything. That was last year's team. This is your team. And especially with new leadership at the quarterback position, right? Now, you've got some great leaders on defense. Jamon Dumas-Johnson and Smile Munden. These two linebackers, good cop, bad cop, I call them. These dudes are big time. They're every bit as good, if not a little bit better, than Butkus Award winner Nakobe Dean was 2 seasons ago. There's some questions. Jalen Carter, easily the best defensive lineman in the country when he's on his game. They're not probably going to be as dynamic at the center of the line, but they're still going to be good. They've recruited well. And I think their offense, believe it or not, could be better with the next quarterback who steps in, because all these guys have better physical tools than Stetson Bennett. Now, we don't know if they got the clutch gene. We don't know if they can pull it out like Stet did in the fourth quarter. And they're going to have to be better, because I don't think the defense is going to be quite as dominant as it's been the last 2 years.
Mike, I got one more question for you, and then we'll let you go. I did read one of your stories. I think it was talking about your point about complacency and the competition within the program is after the national championship game in the locker room. Some of the defensive players are like, hey, did you see who was playing in the fourth quarter? Did you see who was making plays? All these freshmen are coming. We're not going anywhere. They are coming. And, you mentioned Jalen Carter. He might be the number 1 pick of the Bears if they don't trade down or whatever, but he's going top 5 or whatever. What's a name? Is it Bear Alexander? Give us a name to watch on that new defensive line there that they fill that hole.
Well, you know what? I don't know that I would go with the tackle position because we're talking 3 first rounders in the last 2 years. Bear Alexander is a popular name. He's a sophomore. I think he could grow into it. I'm not ready to put him on the Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, Jalen Carter line yet. But Mykel Williams is a guy that plays that defensive end spot that you saw Trayvon Walker, the number 1 overall pick of last year's draft. He's in that position. And that's really a Superman spot, Bill. It's interesting because that position does not necessarily produce dynamic statistics, because they ask that defensive end to do so much in the run game. And Georgia, part of the reason why they don't seem quite as sensational, and I'd be the first to tell you, I don't think either one of these last 2 Georgia national championship teams are going to be teams that we put up there as among the greatest of all time, because they don't have the dynamic super. They don't have Joe Burrow. They don't have a Devontae. They don't have that dynamic figure. But what they play, it can be kind of boring here, but effective, is team ball. And when we talk about team ball and assignment football, particularly on the defense, it comes down to gap integrity, right? And everybody that watching the program, obviously you've got a lot of real educated fans. They understand there's a gap between the center and the guard and the guard and the tackle and the tackle and the tight end. And then somebody's got to be responsible for the perimeter. Well, if everybody just chases the football because they want the sack or they want the stats, you're going to lose out when that guy cuts back or when they design a play to overwhelm one side of the football. But when everybody's on the same page and said, you know what, if I just do my job and cover this one gap and he does his job, you essentially build a wall. And that's what Georgia's done so well. They're very unselfish up front. And having Trayvon Walker go number 1 in the draft is all the evidence. Kirby Smart can say, he wasn't an All-American. You didn't see Trayvon Walker win any individual awards. But what do you want, guys? Do you want to win the trophies, or do you want to get paid millions of dollars? We're developing guys at Georgia that get paid millions of dollars. 15 guys got drafted last year. 5 defensive players in the first round. Those numbers are unprecedented in NFL history. So if you want to chase the trophies, there might be some other schools for you. But if you want to win championships, and if you want to be, I feel like I'm working for Georgia now. You put me in a bad spot here, Bill. That's how they do it. Assignment. Michael Williams, though, he's the dynamic playmaker on that defensive line. They got to find another rush end. I don't see another Nolan Smith. The guy, he pursues people like, if you ever seen those Jurassic Park movies, he looks like a raptor. I mean, he's just big and fast. And you're like, wait, you're not supposed to be that big and fast. But they don't have that. And they got to find that end that you're looking for. That's a star maker position. They don't have a guy. They've been overloaded at that spot. So much that Jermaine Johnson, the ACC Player of the Year and first-round pick, couldn't even start. That's why he transferred to Florida State. They don't have that depth there right now. They need one of these young guys to step up. And I'm not ready to throw any names out there until I see them. And I won't see them until G-Day game.
Well, Mike, that was awesome, man. We'll let you get out on that one. It was a pleasure talking to you as always. I'm sure you and I will cross paths this season as usual. Maybe if you get back up this way back to Big Ten country, you got to give me a shout out. So
we got the combine next week, Bill. You got 12 Georgia. I'm going to be in Indianapolis. I don't want to be there. I want to be in the sun at 70, but there's a lot of football players that are going to be in Indy next week. So I'll be there checking. A lot of SEC players. Bama 13, I think Georgia 12. I'm sure there'll be some Ohio State Buckeyes there too. Maybe I can ask them if they thought if that was a targeting call. Is Ryan Day stopped talking about that? I just wonder. Are they talking about anything else up there? But
no, they talk about that a lot, right? Because of Marvin Harrison will be talking to everybody next year at the combine, and Jackson Smith this year, and the next receiver. I do think Ohio State's in the conversation. They proved that, and Michigan's working toward that conversation, though they don't have the 4- and 5-star depth to maybe beat a Georgia yet, but we'll see over the next few years as we get into it. And like I said, Mike, you do an awesome job. I encourage all our listeners to follow Mike if they want the best Georgia coverage. He's not only a good writer, he's a pretty good friend of me. So, and an FWAA guy like me. So keep following us on there.
All right, guys. I really appreciate the time, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
All right. Well, that was some good Georgia talk, yes?
Yeah, we got a lot of Georgia talk there, and Mike does a good job, and he'll be busy. He gets fired up about him, and he, like he said, wherever he goes, good seasons follow for some reason. So he's been around some good national title teams in his time.
I got my red shirt on, too. I didn't even realize it. That was good planning, non-planning, but convenient choice of shirt nonetheless. So, Bill, Troche trivia. It's going to be Georgia themed, and then we'll go into some other college football news, and then we'll do the answer at the end of the show. You touched on it a little bit already. The schedule for Georgia, not that difficult. 2 teams in Kirby Smart's tenure at Georgia have beaten the Bulldogs, 2 SEC teams, as unranked teams. So Kirby has lost 2 games to unranked SEC teams in his career. Can you name those 2 teams? We will have the answer at the end of the show. 2 unranked SEC teams have beaten the Bulldogs since Kirby.
I got one already.
Taken over.
I spoiled the
you
one.
did mention one already.
I'll see if I can figure out the one.
You're stepping on my trivia question already, Bill. So,
yeah,
anyway.
I got one because it was. I'll tell you the story about that. But let's go into another topic I do want to talk about. So I'll let you set this one up.
Yeah, Ross Salinger of SI.com had a lot of information on some clock rules that are changes that are going to be considered. 4 proposals, and it looks like 2 are very non-controversial, and then 2 are notable and should have an effect on play. The goal is to cut the college football, get the length of the games. They're getting longer and longer. They're up to 3 hours and 21 minutes on average. I think I heard Ross say 1 out of every 5 goes over 3.5 hours. The NFL averages 3 hours, 10 minutes. And the colleges, like I said, right now it's 321. NFL, there's an average of 155 plays over the last 5 years. And in college, it's 180. So, in the interest of fewer plays, more safety for the players. They're trying to figure out how can we speed up the game a little bit, have fewer plays and to get I'm sure the TV networks want to squeeze it so it doesn't go over 3.5 hours because they like those 3.5 hour TV windows. So they want to do what they can to shorten the games. So the first two, one is if there's an opportunity for an untimed down because of a defensive penalty at the end of the first quarter or the third quarter, they're just going to move on to the next quarter. That isn't going to have much of an effect. You are not allowed to call back-to-back timeouts, typically to ice a kicker. That happens, once a season for a team, right? A last-second field goal is not a regular occurrence. Isn't going to save much time on average. But the next two proposals that Ross reported on was one, that the clock would no longer stop after a first down outside of the last, I believe it's 2 minutes of the each half. As soon as the clock will just continue to run like it does in the NFL. And then the second proposal was to have the clock on incomplete passes for the whole game. The clock would stop when it was an incomplete pass. Then they as soon as they spot the ball, the clock would run. That would change football as we know it, right? So that one's kind of controversial. So let's talk first about the one with running the clock on first downs. Your thoughts on that, and then talk about running the clock on incomplete passes.
Well, they need to run it on first downs. Like that should be. This isn't like these rules that they made were designed when college football was a running sport and a plotting sport compared to the NFL. When a team can run as many plays as Oregon can, they don't need to stop the clock on first downs. The incomplete pass one I understand, but all of these rules come from the genesis for me. A number that popped up on Ross that I can't believe that a college game takes only 3 hours and 20 minutes with what I watched. There's no way they take at least 4 hours. It's become to me, I've made the joke like 5 years ago that college football games take longer than it does to watch the movie Gettysburg, which is 254 minutes. Once you get a game into 200 minutes, and for me, it's fine. Like I'm at an age where I'm going to sit and watch. I'm telling you right now, and I've told people this for 5 years, a younger generation is not going to watch 4 hour college football game. They're not. They're just not. You can fit 2 soccer games in a college football game right now. And with the attention spans that teenagers have, and I have one that's getting close, and kids, they're not going to watch that for 4 hours. There's only so many times you can watch the Fansville commercials or Craig Robinson and the Pizza Hut commercials. What
happens if you want to try to watch 2 games?
No, like I can't watch a 4 hour football game. I don't like watching a 4 hour football game. So they absolutely need to pick it up. The NFL does do a good job of packaging their game in 3:15 or less. They're very good at it. They move them along. The timeouts come when they need to. They don't when they don't. The big one out of the 4, I don't know that you need to keep the clock running after an incomplete pass because college offenses aren't NFL offenses. They're advanced, but they're not NFL offense level. But you do need to run it after first downs. They don't need to stop the clock. Maybe in the last 2 minutes you can go back to the old rules, but the 3:20 that Ross put on there, it's obviously correct, but I would love to see a breakout on prime time or like top 25 games, like the big game on Fox each week. How long does that one take? Because I guarantee it's not 3:20.
And they don't kick it off till 8:07 and not 8 o'clock. So an 8 o'clock game doesn't, you know what I mean? There's 7 minutes right there and all that kind of stuff. So are you in favor of running the clock on incomplete passes?
No, not yet. But I would start with running it on first downs. There's no reason why they keep it running. Just keep going. I would find a way to touch up review. I remember being at a game, I think it was Michigan, Wisconsin, where they reviewed a goal line play on 3 consecutive plays. And I was like, what are we even doing here? Commercials I get you have to have the commercials to have the game. They pay the bills. I understand all that. But this it's a problem to me. It's my number one. If I was making a list of the things that annoy me about college football, the time it takes to play a game is probably number one. I think there's no reason why it can't be played in 3 hours and 15 minutes. I think they have to work toward doing that, like I said, because of a younger generation that's just going to tune out. And quite frankly, an older generation. I got buddies that if you live on the East Coast like we do, well, not East Coast, I guess Ohio, we're still Eastern time zone.
Right.
What my buddies are not staying up and watching a Pac-12 game that takes 4 hours. They're not going to do it. They're going to go to bed because they're going to watch NFL the next day. So until they figure this part out, and I hope these changes work. And the first two minor ones, we can do that. That's fine. The consecutive timeouts, I'm fine with it. But if they had to go to taking running the clock through an incomplete pass, I probably wouldn't have a problem with that either, honestly, because most of these teams are doing no huddle.
I have been a vehement opponent of freezing the kicker. For my, I can't stand that. My rule proposal would be if a team is in a field goal formation and the center touches the ball, you cannot call timeout. Either team cannot call timeout at that point. These practice kicks and the just calling it right before the snap and no one knows if it was a real kick or not. It's not football. It's not part of the game. It does not, there's no strategy to it. It's ridiculous. It's like taking the ball out of a free throw shooter's hand, like right as he's like starting to go up. Oh, timeout. But like, that's not how it is. But so I'm glad that they at least prevented people from calling back-to-back timeouts on the kicker thing. One thing that I have also felt for a long time, that hasn't been discussed that I've seen in this recent proposals of trying to shorten games is if the NFL it's 11 minutes shorter on average than the college game that they studied, 3:10 to 3:21. That's 11 minutes. The NFL halftime is 8 minutes shorter. So that's 8 of the 11 minutes right there. Now, college does speaking as a parent whose daughter is involved in the Georgia Tech band, you want them to have their time at halftime, but I still think they could get a halftime show out there in and out in 15 minutes. I think they should cut 5 minutes off the halftime from 20 to 15. That would be a significant, when we're trying to shave off 8-9 minutes, if you can get 5 right there and kind of leave the game alone as much as you can, I think they should look at that. And you want to try to kick off, especially like, NFL games, a 1:00 game kicks off at 1:00 and 15 seconds. That's just boom, right?
Yep.
College, it's, they just ran on the field. They just did this. They just did that. If the TV networks are worried about the 3.5 hour window and they don't want to cut any advertisement, kick it right at 12:01. Kick it right at 3:31. Do not stretch it out. Notre Dame doesn't kick off till 3:45. It's supposedly a 3:30 game on NBC. That's why at 6:15 it's halftime, and you're like, "What just happened?" Well, they didn't kick off till 3:45, and they had a 20-minute halftime, and all of a sudden it's 6 o'clock, and we're early in the third quarter. So that's something I think they should look at too. I agree that they should try to run the clock on the first downs for sure. I think it would really change the game if you didn't stop it on incomplete passes, and I think. It would level the playing field. Taking plays away helps the underdog. And so that would be interesting to see. My guess is the powers that be are not going to be on board with trying to shave plays off. So, because, the better team is probably going to win the more plays there are. So we'll see. The better teams usually have the power in these types of situations. All right, before we get out of here, are you ready? Troche Trivia. 2 SEC teams have beaten, 2 unranked SEC teams have beaten Kirby Smart's Georgia team since Kirby took over. You mentioned one, South Carolina. Can you name the other unranked SEC team that has beaten Kirby Smart?
I'm going to say South Carolina for sure, because that was on my 40th birthday, and I remember that one. I'll guess Florida, his first season, and I'm probably wrong. It had to have happened his first season because it hasn't happened since, but I'm going to guess Florida got him when they weren't ranked that year.
It did happen his first season. It was not the Florida Gators. The correct answer down in Athens, no less. Vanderbilt, 17.
Oh, that's right. They did.
Georgia,
That's
16. Right. A game that lives on in Vanderbilt folklore.
That might be the last time you beat them for a very long time. So no, but yeah, I knew South Carolina. They outplayed them that day. I do remember that one very vividly. So it doesn't happen often, and it's probably going to happen a little bit less over the next 5 years.
Right, and the point I was making was that they're not going to have a ranked team on their schedule until Tennessee, probably. So, I don't see a big upset like you mentioned. It looks like smooth sailing for the first 10 weeks of the year as their new offensive coordinator, new quarterback, get their feet wet, and then obviously it'll be a challenge. You got Tennessee, then they've got the SEC championship, then you got 2 playoff games. I mean, it will ramp up eventually, but the first 10 weeks of the year they should be solid favorites all the way through. So once again, we want to thank Mike Griffith for joining us from the AJC Dawg Nation. He was great. Follow Bill Bender at Bill Bender 92. And you can follow me at Bill Trocchi on Twitter as we go through the season. We've got some good off-season content on sportingnews.com. Bill, you went through the quarterback battles that we should see in spring practice. We'll talk about that next week on CFB Nation here. I think we may have another special guest, Brian Driscoll. We'll talk a little Notre Dame and all their offseason drama that they've endured. And now that the dust has finally settled, we'll get a report on the Domers and see what's going on there. But once again, we want to thank everybody for listening to this podcast. We are going to keep rolling through the offseason. At least once a week, and then if news dictates, we will do more than that. But we will see you next week, and thank everyone for listening to the CFB Nation All-America podcast.